Floods, set off by violent thunderstorms, raged through 6 states from Colorado to Arkansas. The South Platte River cut a mile-wide swath through Denver, causing heavy damage in the industrial area of the city in one of the worst disasters in Western history. Damage in Denver will run into the tens of millions of dollars. 15 bridges in or near the city have been destroyed. Trailer parks were wiped out, with many mobile homes carried by floodwaters miles downstream. Colorado's governor, in appealing for federal aid, estimates that property damage in his state alone is more than $100 million. As the crest of the Arkansas River drops in Colorado, the devastating wall of water continues downstream into Kansas, leaving 14 dead. Dodge City, Kansas is the next major center in the path of the flood. And here the river rises 14 feet in a matter of 1 short hour. Although the city was hastily diked, an area 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide is underwater. In Montana, New Mexico, Wyoming, and Arkansas, it was the same. While the eastern United States suffers an unprecedented drought, the West is flooded out.
There's no question. People just jumped in and helped. What I remember about Pauline Lightcap is she served a delicious meal that day around her table. Well, I think we look to people for our assistance rather than to a government.
Well, I was just going to tell you about my boss. I lived in Colorado Springs. I moved out to Colorado Springs in '91. And he said before that they remember that flood of '65 too, because it flooded all the bridges out there. For about 2 weeks, seemed like it rained every day, about an inch. He remembered one Saturday he emptied a 5-gallon bucket, sat out in the middle of his yard, just checked the rainfall, see how much it rained, and that bucket ran over. And that might have been the same time that they got the rain out there. They also got it this side of the John Martin Dam.
Well, at that time it was John Martin, because I called up there and talked to a woman, because some of the people in Kinsley thought there had been a breach in the dam. And she said, no, actually the reservoir was nearly empty when that rain started in the mountains, and it filled it. It would have been a lot worse if that dam hadn't been there.
We had some relation that was out there. They had to go in by boat to get them out. And for a while they couldn't even get into them with a boat. It was just that powerful coming in.
I had just turned 15. The whole idea of a flood, really couldn't comprehend that. You know, when I thought of a flood, I thought, okay, the river will rise and it'll spread out, you know, and had no idea this wall of water that was, you know, that came.
Well, if it wouldn't have spread out in this area, probably Larned and Great Bend would have had a lot tougher.
He called on that Friday morning and said, you got your combine ready? And I said, I did. I don't know why, because our week was still a week away. But Jack Kirstein brought his combine down, and Dad had one, and I had one, and Harry W. Wetzel, he came over with a new C2 cleaner, or C cleaner, brand new, and helped us. So there's 4 combines going on at area right south of town, and then everybody just kind of helped us. Everybody else over the co-op took wheat wet Friday and Saturday, and Sunday, and helping everybody else. And Army Corps of Engineers was trying to chase us out with their helicopters. I remember that.
You know, it was on the news media, on the radio, that the floodwaters had went over the Coronado Bridge. And I remember when we was coming home, Dad says, this is going to be more than he thought initially that it would be. Because I think it was like it was coming so far, like how could it just keep coming with that much water and that much force? But when he heard that, he knew it was going to be a bigger deal than he initially had thought.
I remember that particular weekend, I was coming from Salt Lake City to Offerle. I got on a bus in Denver, and we were coming through Palmer. I think there's a city called Palmer Lake. And the rain just came down in torrents. And we got into Lamar and La Junta that night, and I took the last train out from La Junta to went through here for a couple weeks anyway. Dad and I moved the combines down to Leander Lightcap's place to cut wheat. And I don't remember all who were there, and I don't remember hauling the wheat anywhere, but I'm sure we did. But I do remember there were 4 of us, 4 sets of us down there cutting wheat, and the last time we went around, There were four combines making the rounds, and the next time we went around, the water was right there. And on Sunday night, I had gone to Dodge City to visit my grandmother who was in the hospital. And I drove down the 2nd Street Bridge, and you could see the people sandbagging the area.
Somebody had come down with their combine, but then the next day, on Sunday, anybody that wanted to come with a machine, you know. We had, I can just remember, lots of machines, but there was, we were short on trucks. There was one high spot on the whole farm, and they rode the combines up there and just dumped on the ground, you know, so they could keep cutting and stuff. And that wheat was, it was piled there and stayed dry.
I can still remember KGNO, and Paul McShane said, "This is Paul McShane on the 2nd Street Bridge," and you know, going on late that Sunday.
Well, I know on Sunday morning is people came and they wanted to move, you know, the furniture and stuff. And my mom, "Oh no, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right," you know. And she was just insistent, just, you know, it'll be okay. And pretty soon, they just didn't pay any attention to her, and stuff got loaded up, stuff went upstairs. I mean, the whole bottom of the house was cleaned out, and the freezers were loaded up and taken into Offerle.
I remember all the combines coming up the road from the south, and that water was just coming in behind them.
We've had some quick harvest, but then, you know, the combine didn't go out either, you know. But when we got done cutting wheat, and it was evening, you know how it is, you always have lunch in the field during harvest and stuff, and there was a bunch of us, we congregated over at Mathis's and ate, you know, out of the back in the, you know, the tailgate of the pickup and stuff, and had sandwiches and stuff, and it was, and I guess from there everybody evacuated then.
That afternoon, my dad and mom and me went down to the river. I was 12 years old, and everybody else was cutting wheat, cutting it green to get it out of the field. We went down to the river in Mom and Dad's car. We sat and watched the river coming up. You know, I think we got there about 5 o'clock maybe. But it seemed like the water was coming up about 1 inch a minute, you know, and then pretty soon here some trash started coming down the river, and I remember a mallard duck decoy. And pretty soon here come a dead steer rolling down the river. And a few minutes after that, a helicopter flew over, and on loudspeaker said, "Get the heck out," because there's a crest is just up the river a little bit, 3 or 4 foot crest, I guess.
The water went through our house. We never did go back, so we had to rejuvenate another house. I didn't want to leave. I finally, when Brett was born, that was in '60, got a bathroom in that house. I'd never had one, so I just didn't want to leave. But they took all the furniture upstairs. Of course, we couldn't move the deep freeze, so it went through the flood, but it's still running. It's down in Brett's basement. Coronado made a good deep freeze. A helicopter did land in our yard and told us to get out. We weren't wanting to go. It wasn't a very good house, but it was home.
Mom and I had already left, and there was a helicopter lit in the yard, and told Dad, he said, "You better get in here, we got to get you out of here." And he said, "Well, 2-story house here yet." He said, "You better get everybody out of Kinsley if I'm going to get wet." But we were cutting wheat north of there at the creek, and when we come around that curve, there was, I'd say probably about as high as this table, just rolling a wall from the river clear, which almost half a mile wide, you know, this trash and stuff. That was a really weird scene.
It was the darnest thing. We didn't get any in the house. But the Army engineers said that by their calculations, it should have been up to the window sills. What prevented it was, you know, Dad had corrals on the east, the south, and on the west, and that had that woven wire sheep fence, and that just all packed in with wheat straw. And it just made a wall to separate the waters around the house.
For days afterwards down there, we're a couple miles from the river, but you could hear that water rushing down there. You could hear the noise of the water running down there all the time. He had 2 miles away, and it took a while for it to finally, you know, get down and then clean the mess up everywhere.
First, that Dad thought he could get back in there. There was a shelter belt west of the place, And he weighed it down through that, and he walked along the tree belt so he could hang on to trees, and I mean, you know, and had a walking stick. I think it was just Providence intervention, because Dad did not know how to swim. Where the tree belt came down, and then there was another tree belt that went around the place, so there's just a you know, drive in between where you'd go from one field to the other. And where those waters had split, it washed, oh, I bet it was a 20-foot hole. It was down to the gravel, and I mean, you know, and Dad flood irrigated then and stuff. Boy, did that foul up the field big time. Where it was just a straight drop off. It was the weirdest thing, the way that hole had washed out, that he didn't just fall into that. So we were very fortunate on that part, but oh, the mess afterwards, you know, all the outbuildings and the shop and the shed, and such a mess. And then when that waters, you know, when everything was drying up, it had that thick old crust of silt, and it stank.
The smell of that old mud and stuff, I remember that. Oh, it was sticky and nasty smelling, and every time it rained, you still had that smell for probably 2-3 years later. Folks finally had some sand hauled in there to get rid of the smell, because every time it rained, it was nasty.
Oh yeah, when they went back to get the furniture stuff, the gnats were terrible. Yeah, it's still standing, but it had those, it's really old house. I heard at one time M.W. Oliphant was born there. They had the white boards, and they just came up like that. You know, it was hot, and those gnats just ate them up, trying to, it was quite a while before they ever got back in there, so. The only thing we didn't take upstairs was, and it belonged to my mother, it was a china closet. I've never refinished it because you could tell how far the water was.
Yeah, it stunk and had 6 inches of silt in the stubble, but at least the stubble held it. And it made some better ground for several years, but that was...
As I come in that evening, I had little baby chicks out there, and I forgot about them. And then all at once dawned on me, oh, my chicks are right out there. So we had an old wash tub. I floated it out there and put them in it and floated them to the barn and got them out of there. And of course, as kids, we had a couple cousins there at the same time, and that wash tub the next day worked pretty good. You get up there at the one end and hop in it, and you could float on down through the yard. And we were doing that.
The whole thing of the flood, I was scared. Probably the one thing that really worried me, because my dad was a strong man, but it was the first time I ever seen him shed tears. Where we lived at the time, you know, it was over 1,000 acres, and there was just probably 20-25 acres that didn't go under this hilltop where they dumped the wheat. So everything was underwater. Cattle were here and there. I mean, it was scary for me as a kid, because
I did go up with Ed Molitor the following day and fly over it to see the homes. We took off from Everett over here, flew above it, and so I got to see it, and it seemed like the water was coming down out of the sand hills, you know. That's where the guy needed a film of that, too.
Well, if there's anything that's helping neighbors out, regardless of the situation, you just go. That's a trait of rural life, I think. You mentioned Barry Blank a few minutes ago. He one time made the comment to me that the future of our area depended upon water and power. He didn't know which would go first, the water or the power. It'd be so expensive to bring the water out of the ground.
Top water is depleting, you know. You drive out western Kansas, you know, where they used to have a lot of water. Now you see the sprinklers. You doesn't really look to see if they're sprinkling, you know. They're 65, they were just very little irrigation around there, flood irrigation. The sprinklers just started.
I hate to think what's facing these kids or my grandkids, what down the line to the rules or the laws and stuff, or I don't know, it scares me what they're going to dream up.
You know, back in the 60s or when the flood was, you would have never thought water would be so important nowadays back then you didn't think about it. But you know, here you're paid $80 or $90 a bottle of water. Who would have thought about paying $1 for a bottle of water back then?
It's almost daily here of late of rights and things that are being taken away or government control. Our children, grandchildren a lot of them, they're not going to know how it was. They're going to grow up that this is the way it is. The government does this, they do that. It's going to be the norm. And they're not going to know how life used to be, how much better it was, and what is being taken from us.
There was a greater sense of faith. God will provide. He uses people to help provide, not the government.
I do remember when Dad, when he walked down that shelter belt, I remember when he was talking about it later, it was kind of, I guess it was like encouragement, because when he was walking in, he heard the couple of the roosters crowing, and he knew the chickens were okay. But they had to sit on those roosts for days because of the water. But anyhow, they survived.